Hello, and welcome back to MysHistory. I'm Rhonda, and this is where I talk about odd or unsolved historical mysteries. And if that sounds like something that you might be interested in, then please consider subscribing. Sticking with October and spooky stories for the spooky month, I've got one. And it's told often around Halloween due to the scare factor. And who doesn't like a good spooky story for Halloween? It turns out, though, this one might actually be rooted in some historical fact, maybe. Let's talk about the Headless Horseman. So we all know the legend of Sleepy Hollow as written by Washington Irving. That one, mild-mannered yet superstitious schoolmaster Ichabod Crane comes to the Dutch settlement of Tarrytown, New York, in the area of Sleepy Hollow. And while he's there, he does odd jobs to help out the families which he lodges with. The ladies found him terribly interesting because of his way with children, I guess. I don't know. But eventually he finds himself fancying the young Katrina Van Tassel, who was the only daughter of a wealthy farmer, Baltus Van Tassel. Ichabod would have some competition, wooing the young lass by another local man named Abraham Brom Van Brunt. Ichabod, not being a fighter, would refuse a physical altercation with Brom in order to win the affections of young Katrina. One autumn evening, Ichabod attends a harvest party at the Van Tassel farm, where he proceeds to eat, drink, and commence to merriment, and partakes in the town's telling of local ghost stories, particularly the tale of the Headless Horseman. The Headless Horseman, who rides the countryside, searching for a head, his head that he lost. Honestly, though, all Ichabod really planned to do was to propose to Katrina once all of the guests left. Things did not go as planned for Ichabod. So, failing in his objective to propose, he climbs on his horse Gunpowder and proceeds to head for home. But as he rides through the woods between the Van Tassel farm and Sleepy Hollow, he passes through many alleged haunted spots. He started to replay the many stories that were shared at the party. And just like anybody else, I don't know about you, but you hear something, it's spooky, it's scary, and now it's quiet and you're alone with just your thoughts, and you start replaying all of this spooky stuff in your head. And now you have legitimately freaked yourself out. Excellent. So, I can imagine this is maybe Ichabod riding through the forest alone in the dark. Ghost stories. But it wasn't until after he passed a lightning-struck tree that Ichabod would encounter a cloaked rider at an intersection, which unsettled our young Ichabod. As he drew closer, he noticed that the rider had no head, at least not on his shoulders. It was in his saddle. Terrified, Ichabod would spur Gunpowder on to race against, this headless man to get out of there. And he's riding away. He crosses over a bridge before the ghostly headless rider, But once he crossed the bridge, Ichabod would turn around to then see the headless rider rear his horse and hurl his head at Ichabod, which caused Ichabod to fall from his horse. The next morning, Ichabod was gone, without a trace. With Ichabod out of the picture, Brom Bones would go on to marry the young Katrina, but was said, quote, to look exceedingly knowing whenever the story of Ichabod was related. In fact, the only remains of Ichabod's flight from the Horseman were his hat, the trampled saddle of his horse, gunpowder, and a shattered pumpkin. All of this leads to the assumption in the story that the Horseman was in fact Brom Bones, who was trying to frighten Ichabod off so that he could marry Katrina, which seemed to have worked out quite well in his favor. So, is there historical fact in this story? No, but there is kind of an interesting history. Washington Irving was not the first person to pen a story of a headless rider. Tales of a headless rider date back to the Middle Ages. Stories can be found by the brothers Grimm, because why would they not have written something so terrifying to share with children? As well as the Dutch and Irish legend of Galahad or Goncan, who was a grim reaper-like rider who carried his head around just not on his shoulders. According to historian Elizabeth Bradley, the likely source for the tale penned by Irving might be found in The Chase by Sir Walter Scott. This is an English translation of the German poem The Wild Huntsman by Gottfried Berger? Sorry, Germany. And is said to possibly have been based on Norse mythology. The Dutch and Irish legend of Galahad, or the Dark Man, does have some roots in Celtic mythology. As it is told, this Dark Man is the embodiment of Crom Dubh, the fertility god who demanded a blood sacrifice in the form of decapitation, which is an oddly specific blood sacrifice. Maybe it was him that was running around during the French Revolution, screaming for everybody's head. That's what it was. Anyway, according to this legend, the Dark Man's reign of terror would end once Christianity came to Ireland, which was a source of frustration to the Dark Man. But it is said that the Dark Man does still roam the countryside, calling out the names of those who are doomed to die while carrying around a decaying head under his arm. And in some versions, they describe the decaying head as like old moldy cheese. So now we circle back to the story penned by Washington Irving and possibly being inspired by the works of Sir Walter Scott's poem, The Wild Huntsman. According to history, it is possible that during his travels abroad, Irving may have heard a tale or two and opted to write an American version of it. Irving would meet and befriend Scott in 1817, so it's very plausible that he had been influenced by Scott's work. Elizabeth Bradley would describe The Wild Huntsman as, quote, The poem is about a wicked hunter who is doomed to be hunted forever by the devil and his dogs of hell as punishment for his crimes. In the telling of the story by Irving, the Headless Horseman is actually the ghost of a Hessian soldier who lost his head to a cannonball during an unnamed battle during the Revolutionary War. From there, you get to the ghost stories told during Ichabod's crying time in Sleepy Hollow and the ensuing terror. It is also possible that Irving drew some inspiration for his work while a teen living in the Tarrytown region. According to history, the Irving family would move to the Tarrytown area in 1798 from New York City to flee a yellow fever outbreak. It was there where Irving would be introduced to local lore and ghost stories using actual, and then he would use the actual names from the area, like Van Tassel, as well as becoming familiar with the old Dutch church and churchyard and the Major Andres tree, which is said to be the tree that was struck by lightning. Mix in a little bit of Revolutionary War history, and you get The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Irving. Elizabeth Bradley would describe the story as, "It's a melting pot of a story and thus totally American." In The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Irving, he would describe the Headless Horseman as, quote, "the ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head had been carried off by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War." There are some historical documents that do support this, according to the memoir of Major General William Heath on his experiences in 1798 during the war. In a journal entry from November 1st, 1776, Heath would write, quote, "A shot from the American cannon at this place took off the head of a Hessian artilleryman. This place might be White Plains, New York, which is located less than 10 miles from Tarrytown, and likely how the legend started." Now, while I was researching, I did find a source that said there was a soldier who had had a run-in with a cannon, but he wasn't Hessian. It turns out he was a man from Salisbury in Wiltshire, England, by the name of Joseph William Bennett. He was an officer in the British Army and had been sent to the Hesse Artillery Corps on December 12th, 1775 to act as their adjunct. And it would be during the Battle of White Plains in 1776 when Joseph would be struck by a cannonball in his left shoulder and collarbone. He would end up losing his arm, would return to England in 1778, where he would live out the remainder of his days. Another story about a Hessian soldier is that a Hessian soldier's headless corpse was found in Sleepy Hollow after a battle there. That body would be buried by the Van Tassel family in an unmarked grave in the old Dutch burying ground. So, as I previously stated, Irving and his family would move to Tarrytown in 1798. It was here where Irving would become charmed by the town's Dutch character, and the idyllic countryside was said to have captured his imagination. According to Irving, he heard many legends and ghost stories saying, quote, "Villagers spoke in hushed whispers of the strange cries heard in the woods where the captured British spy, John Andre, had been hanged." And I think that's the lightning struck tree, right? That's the tree that the lightning struck. People back east watching this, if there's anybody back there, let me know. Is that the right tree? John Andre's tree, that's the lightning struck tree. Anyway, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was first published in 1819, and in it, Irving would recount the charming, quaint customs of Tarrytown. Some other interesting facts and tidbits, at least to me, that I found were that Irving was said to like to name the characters of his books after people that he actually knew. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was no different in this regard. It is reported that while Irving was an aide to New York Governor Daniel D. Tompkins, he had actually met a man named Ichabod Crane at an inspection. It is believed that he used that name and may have created the character of Ichabod after a man named Jesse Merwin, who was a local teacher in Kinderhook. As for the name Katrina von Tassel, it is believed that it is based on a woman by the same name whose family Irving had stayed with for a period of time and asked permission to use her name and to build up a character based loosely on the actual Katrina Van Tassel. Interesting. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is said to be America's first ghost story, and according to Elizabeth Bradley, it endures because, quote, it inspires people because it reminds them that there are still some American mysteries, some half-truths that may never be fully known, and that's the whole point. The legend lends itself to any interpretation, and it continues to fascinate and terrify us in the best way possible. And she's not wrong. It is a fascinating story. I mean, people have heard about it, and you have to look at what's been born out of that legend since it was first published in 1819. In film, in 1922, there was a silent film titled The Headless Horseman, which starred Will Rogers as Ichabod Crane. In 1949, Disney would make an animated adaptation of it titled The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. This was narrated by Bing Crosby. In 1999, Tim Burton would go on to direct Sleepy Hollow, which starred Johnny Depp. It was a great movie if you haven't seen it, by the way. In television, in 1980, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow would star Jeff Goldblum as Ichabod Crane and Dick Butkus, yes, the football player, as Brom Bones. In 1994, in an episode on a series that Nickelodeon had, Are You Afraid of the Dark?, they had The Tale of the Midnight Ride. And in 2013, a crime/horror series entitled Sleepy Hollow would portray Ichabod as an English professor and turncoat during the Revolutionary War. There have also been theater adaptations and songs about the legend of Sleepy Hollow. Interesting. So, what are your thoughts on the Headless Horseman? I find it kind of interesting that there are some little historical tidbits, in the story, but I really doubt that there's some headless horseman roaming around the countryside on Halloween searching for a head and just has a pumpkin for one. I don't know. Have you read the book by Washington Irving or seen any of the movies or television series about it? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. Until next time, really stay safe. It's Halloween. It's a scary time. And apparently, well, maybe it's just back east, but watch out for a headless horseman. I'm just saying. Bye.